Welcome to your key discovery point. I am Brett Burney from Nextpoint, joined by Doug Austin of eDiscovery Today. Doug, you covered a case this week from the Western District of New York. We don't hear a lot about the Western District, Buffalo and Rochester. The Southern District kind of, takes up most of your headlines in a lot of places, and for good reason. But this was a case. It's Hall v. Warren. It seemed like kind of a run-of-the-mill ESI protocol discussion and some run-of-the-mill objections to the protocols from the parties, but then some not so run-of-the-mill denials of all of those objections. The court was pretty ruthless here in its denials brought up by the defendants. But some interesting studies here, some interesting facts that came out of this, I thought.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, hat tip to Michael Berman of eDiscovery LLC, who blogged about
Yeah,
this case, and that's how I found out about it. It's interesting because I don't think we normally see a situation where a court says, "Okay, give me what you want from an ESI protocol standpoint, and I'm going to take your two
right.
proposals and create an ESI protocol." And he tried to get them to meet and confer and develop a joint proposed ESI protocol, but they just couldn't agree. Then Magistrate Judge Mark Peterson, that you see referenced there in the first
Hmm.
paragraph, went to get basically put it together and not only came up with an ESI protocol, but entered it in as an ESI order, which of course makes it much more important
Right. You got to follow it
to
now.
adhere to because yes,
Right.
because then not adhering to it, you're violating a court order. Then, of course, city defendants objected to a series of things, a series of considerations in the ESI order. And what I attempted to do is hit the highlights in the blog post. A couple of things that are noted here is that the a couple of local rules of civil procedure,
Right.
26E4 and 26E5 came up, and some of the objections, especially around 26E4, were the ones that you're starting to pull up there. And
Hmm.
among the disputes were things such as the potential production of metadata. The basically the plaintiffs made their arguments about the metadata being critical to their claims of excessive force, failure to supervise and discipline, because this dealt with basically I guess police excessive force claims and what have you.
Right. Right.
Um, you've got those explanations, and the court said, yeah, they've shown good cause to require the production of metadata. The court disagreed that the plaintiffs had to establish search terms to demonstrate a particular need.
Hmm.
Basically the value versus the burden. I think, just right down the line, the burden of compliance. And one of the things that I think was really interesting is when you get down to some of the later considerations. For example, the production in native format, and the city defendants were saying we don't have the technical ability to produce in native format because we
Right.
can't bait stamp them or redact them. And that's
Right.
the age-old argument we hear
Yes.
is, the whole, oh, we can't produce natively, we can't bait stamp them. Well, so it's easy enough to get around both of those. From a bait stamping consideration, you don't have to bait stamp a native file, but you can have a file number.
Hmm.
And if you then subsequently have to use that file in exhibit or whatnot, you can basically take that file level Bates number and put in basically a prefix, a suffix to it, -1,
Right.
-2, whatever, to be the pages of that file and produce those as exhibits. So it doesn't preclude you from doing so. And this is something, of course, Craig Ball's talked about a lot. And then for
Yes.
redactions, as you know, Brett, it's pretty common to say, hey, if we're producing natively, but we have to redact something, we'll meet and confer on it. We can either potentially redact in the native file, or often what they'll do is they'll say files needing redactions, we'll PDF or TIFF those, redact them, and produce them that way. So there are, basically what Craig says is don't let the requirements of a few files dictate the requirements of,
Right.
of everything. And I think that's, that was one of the considerations. Another consideration was that they were complaining about the particular load file that the plaintiffs were requesting. And honestly, that's something any eDiscovery, any eDiscovery professional should be able to produce in a variety of load file formats. In fact, I think there are utilities out there that if you generate one load file, you can convert it to another load file format if it's not one
Right.
that's you're accustomed to. So those are the types of things that really I think the city defendants were objecting to, and right down the line, District Judge Gerasi just denied, overruled their objections.
It's kind
And
of a smackdown here, like all of
yeah,
them, just like pow,
it
pow,
was
pow,
kind
pow,
of a
pow.
it was kind of a smackdown. And of course he also, I mean, he referenced Rule 26E5 as well. And the and even I think probably corrected their contention about the ESI order in some instances, saying it doesn't call for global mandatory production in native format.
Right.
It says native format will be considered on a case-by-case basis. And it also mirrors the language of Local Rule 26E5 by requiring a particularized showing for native production after initial production. So it seems like city defendants were being probably a bit rigid in their, in what they wanted to do from an ESI protocol standpoint, and the plaintiffs ultimately wanted to provide some options in there, and the court, let them do that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, to
I think
me,
it's
yeah,
important.
go ahead.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
important to hear. Like you've referenced this. The first time I started reading through this, I'm like, well, wait a minute. The federal rules of civil procedure don't require that. There's nothing. They're not going through a specific load file. And then I made sure, like I think almost any e-discovery professional or any litigator, frankly, should make sure you check. There are several courts now that have built up these local rules, and indeed the Western District of New York. In fact, these were just effective January 1st, 2023. So they're fairly new in this. And if you go through here, they say that they were created in collaboration with the federal bar, and then they even further go to say that these rules are meant to supplement the federal rules of civil procedure. And I thought, okay, well, that's good. I've seen some courts come up with local rules, and usually it's just maybe a few pages of some additional strategies. But wow, this set of rules goes into a lot more detail. You were talking about, the 26E down here. And sure enough, if you go through here, 26E4 talks specifically about metadata, even talking about requiring a showing of good cause and emotion from the requesting party before all the metadata is turned over. Many times I've just taken that for granted. Like, of course you supply the metadata. That's part of the production. And then they even talk about the format down here. I just think this is great, and kudos to the Western District of New York for coming up with this, and at least providing some additional coloring around. And frankly, I feel like that's where a lot of this case that you reported on is kind of hinging. Like, we sort of had this foundation of the federal rules of civil procedure. Of course, this is in federal court, but then just making sure you're following all of the additional, commentary, the additional potential rules that they've applied on this that might come from a specific court in which you're practicing here. And so, if you understand that and read some of the rules first, then I feel like that the case makes a little bit more sense. Like, okay, well, maybe that's why they were trying to bring up some of the objections in the way that they were.
Yeah.
For example, even quickly just going back to the load file here. I mean, they're talking about, it mentions like a relativity load file that they were requesting, the plaintiffs were requesting. And, I get to start thinking like, Okay, well, pretty much any eDiscovery platform you're using today is going to provide some kind of a format like that that will certainly be compatible with relativity. So my question is, even was the city defendants even using a platform at that point? Now, to be fair, also some of this, like you mentioned, is not just like a typical emails and documents. There's like some images, there's like a lot of body cam footage, and that, some of these file types that may not always be so easy to review and produce. So I feel like I wanted to at least throw that in, to kind of be fair, look at both sides there.
Yeah, that's a great point. And with some of the objections that they had here, especially with regards to, oh, we can't, we can't Bates number and redact native
Right.
files and things like that, made me wonder just how e-discovery savvy the city defendants were.
Yes.
Because
Right.
I think some of these would be something an e-discovery professional would understand, what your options are there, and load file format being another one. So they're either being just trying to be difficult or maybe they're just not very knowledgeable. Regardless, the court just wouldn't have it. And ultimately, at least wanted to, provide the options that the plaintiffs were pushing for, because it wasn't necessarily a cut and dried. It will absolutely be this way. It gives you
Right.
options for doing so, and I think that's what Judge Peterson did in deciding on the particular proposals that he did, was to, continue to give those parties those options.
Man, it's certainly when you have a magistrate judge like come in and say, okay, well, I'm going to pick and choose, from these two orders in there. It's like maybe that's what you should have, raised the arguments or so. And I'm sure there's been a lot more back and forth on this, but just the fact you
Yeah.
have a special master coming forward and creating this, and the district judge was like, yep, that's what we're going to go with. So anyway, thanks for bringing that up, and thanks, Michael, obviously for covering that too. I think it's just an interesting case to make
Yeah.
sure that
Can I
you,
mention? Yeah.
yeah,
I'm sorry. Can I mention one other
absolutely.
thing, Brett? Yeah, and I think the one of the things that this case shows is, you really want to kind of pick your battles when it comes to the meet and confer and the ESI
Good point,
order,
Doug. Yeah.
ESI protocol, because last thing you want is a judge deciding your protocol for you. And so, if you can be flexible on certain areas, then that probably gives you a better shot of getting a protocol hammered out between parties. Now,
Great stuff
I
on
just
there.
wanted to make sure we got that in.
Absolutely. Thank you. And maybe the city, if you need some help on understanding protocols or so, at nextpoint.com, we have several blog posts covering the ESI protocol. We help out a lot of folks on this, and, at least just even, holding their hand for a little bit and just providing some assistance and some templates, that kind of a thing. We have an ESI protocol checklist, for example, is just one of the several resources that we have at nextpoint.com. You can download that for free and just use it. If some of this is not all that familiar or comfortable with you, this is some good resources to start with on there. Well, thanks, Doug. As always, always good to kind of understand what are some of the cases and some of the points to take away. Your key discovery point, I think that's a good one, right? Just be knowledgeable, be careful what you ask for, and understand sort of what you're asking for in some of this with those protocols. And if you can work it out, again, it just comes back, I feel like, to that same theme over and over, Doug. We see it's like if you can cooperate with the other side, if you can come to some kind of an agreement, that's probably going to end up being a little bit better for you today, especially in the federal courts, where judges are just not going to have as much patience for these things and these back and forth all the time.
Yep,
Thanks, Doug, and
agreed.
we'll talk with you next time.
All right. Thanks, Brett. Thanks, everybody.